So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to hear from Victor today. I actually met him at an event in Seattle that was focused on the ACHs, and he was offering with his colleagues kind of a short overview of participatory planning and budgeting, and kind of had us all like try it in a very short amount of time. And I think it's a great example of resident inclusion, of ways that you can actually do it. This is one method, and so just think it will be good to provide this overview for that. And so just a little bit about Victor. So Victor is just up the road from me in Tacoma. So he works there at the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. And he has extensive experience as a community organizer, a social worker, and a program manager. And he's currently serving as the health equity manager there for the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. And he leads health equity services with Public Health Centers for Excellence, which is a partnership between Tacoma and the Spokane Health Department to foster innovation and spread best practices within public health into other sectors. His full bio, or at least a portion of it, is actually in the invite. There also in the invite is an infographic that shows a bit about participatory budgeting as well, just for your reference. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Victor.
All right, thank you so much, Sue. Thanks again for the invitation. I'm really excited to be able to present about participatory planning and budgeting. And I'm excited for any discussion that comes through this presentation. The group is small enough that I was really hoping that this could be more interactive and questions. And so I wanted to say up front that I welcome questions throughout the presentation, and I'll kind of pause throughout the presentation and I'll kind of ask, is there any question? Especially as I go through some of the process aspects. And so I welcome you all just to kind of ask your questions as they come up. So participatory budgeting or planning and budgeting. Okay.
And Victor, can I just for those of you that aren't on mute, could you just put yourself on mute? And then, I just want to reiterate, like, use the chat box or just speak up, because we really want this to be interactive. So thanks.
Absolutely. Perfect. Let me see how I can get this. So today's goals are, the presentation hopes to give you an understanding of what the steps are. We want to share with you some lessons learned about a couple projects that we've implemented, and hopefully develop some knowledge to help you facilitate your own processes, or at least get you thinking about how this may kind of integrate or apply in your own settings. So first question I actually wanted to hear from you all, which is what are some of the most challenging aspects of community engagement in your work? And I'm trying to figure out how I could actually see the chat box, or if Sue, you might be able to help with that.
Yeah, I can help.
So you can use the chat box, or just unmute yourself and just kind of share, what are some of the challenging aspects of community engagement in your work?
Christina from Long Beach. I think one of the things that has the most challenging is kind of balancing that, the need to get information or have, community voices heard, but making sure that those who were kind of integrating the work don't feel like they're being tokenized or used, and also kind of knowing that those feelings have been experienced before, and how do we even heal kind of past discretions at their expense. So I think that's one of our challenges that we have.
And then Sue, were you able to, I was actually having a hard time hearing that.
Well, I think it was Christina, excuse me, and what I heard is just this balance between needing to get information, but then not having people feel tokenized or used. was another one. And then just, I think, recognizing that people have experienced these feelings, like, you know, that it's real. And just creating a space. Christina, was that you, Christina? I think, yes, thank you. My audio isn't great.
Perfect.
So I captured that. And then there's a couple here in the chat box, blending residents' desires with what government can actually achieve. Mm-hmm. And I know, Victor, we talked about that in prep for this. And then where to integrate community engagement and at what level. And then meaningful, authentic community engagement takes a long time, and government doesn't always have the time and available to do it and do it well, especially when not built into the process up front. And let's see, Kelly Marie, providing supports to remove barriers that prevent people from engaging. So providing childcare, transportation, food.
Awesome. Those are, oh, was somebody else wanted to share something?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay. So those definitely resonate with me as someone who's been doing this for a long time, and definitely see the challenges within government. And I think this is some of the aspects of participatory budgeting really address some of these you know, kind of key challenges that you're all expressing. You know, other challenges, you know, for example, we talked about meaningful and authentic community engagement takes time, right? And that's I think one of the most challenging aspects of doing community engagement, because you're right, community engagement is ultimately about relationships, and relationships take time. We can't rush those. You can't rush someone to trust you, right? And you can't really put a time frame on that. That trust is informed by so many things, you know, their own personal experience with whatever agency you're working with, you know, whatever social identities you represent and they represent, just so many kind of aspects that go into that. I wanted to kind of show you, you know, this picture here, you know, to kind of show what kind of typical community engagement looks like. You know, this is kind of a typical kind of setting, you know, where some plans have been developed. And you know, they're at the point where they want to get feedback on kind of the things that already been decided, right? The things that the project set in motion, the decisions, the foundational decisions have been made already, and typically residents get brought in for feedback on kind of decisions that have been made, you know, and also typically don't offer various kind of options, you know, to kind of give that feedback. You know, typically traditional, it's, you know, a setting like this, we have flipboards, you know, and they have a meeting at a library or something, and then whoever comes, and then whoever doesn't, then kind of doesn't. So PB is really looking to take this process of government specifically, but really institutions and agencies, to deepen the process that engages people in decision making. And so hopefully you'll see how it kind of differs from kind of this traditional approach of just getting information, getting feedback when things have already been decided. Before I kind of go any further, I kind of wanted to talk about, you know, what is participatory budgeting? And one of the things I wanted to let you know is that on this presentation, it says participatory planning and budgeting. And here at the health department, we included the piece of planning because sometimes we go through this process that's very similar, but there's no money, right? It's really, for example, if we're trying to develop a strategic plan or a strategy on how to address a particular issue, we might go through a similar process, but we won't just have any money at the end. It'll be more deciding on what direction should we take. And participatory budgeting in general has mostly just been known for participatory budgeting. So for this presentation, I'll mostly be referring to this as participatory budgeting, just so you know, just so people don't get kind of confused around that. So, you know, participatory budgeting is a democratic process in which community members directly decide how to spend part of the public funds. It is a way to manage public money that enables community members to collaborate in making budget decisions that affect their everyday lives. And it's really focused on strengthening government kind of relations with residents, so that government is more transparent, more responsive, and, you know, those that are historically, you know, not involved in, you know, democratic processes are intentionally brought into this particular process. So it's an innovative way to increase meaningful engagement in a public process. It gives community members decision-making authority about how to use funds, changing power dynamics, and creates community leadership and problem solving, and allows community to prioritize ideas and decide where funds should be spent. Again, this is kind of a different approach than when I showed you that picture earlier, right? We're really trying to bring in, there was a question, when do we bring in community? The earliest, like before you start planning, the moment you start thinking we need to engage community, the earliest you can bring community members into that process, the better. And that's kind of the basis in which participatory budgeting is based on, is to really bring in community members into that process that normally is kind of behind the scenes. And it's critical because, one, it builds community capacity and awareness about how the institutions that serve them function, which gives them a sense of kind of empowerment, to change those systems or to provide feedback that really speaks to how institutions function. And sometimes, for example, we go out and we try to get feedback about how can we do things better, how can we improve. And sometimes the feedback is limited because of the limited information people have of how government actually functions, right? So it really is important that the process of engaging folks early on is really important. So that's kind of participatory budgeting in a nutshell. And for us, why do we want to incorporate to public health? Well, it empowers people, like I mentioned, and specifically people most affected are centered as leaders in the process, right? The process shifts the power to community to be in charge of final decision making. It increases civic engagement, like voting. So when we talk about meaningful engagement, right? When people decide how to spend money that impacts their daily lives in their neighborhoods, what we've seen that makes people feel that process is meaningful, right? Too often people engage in a kind of community engagement process and they get engaged, and then after that, you never hear from them again, right? If you're lucky, you may hear kind of the results of what your feedback was, but most of the time, community engagement kind of approaches are limited in the sense that they're very kind of narrow, right? They don't walk people through the whole process. So people don't get to see, this is how my voice actually impacted whatever feedback I was giving back on, right? So when people see that, when people say, hey, this is what I think, or here are my ideas, and they somehow see that reflected in some sort of action in their neighborhood, right? That makes it meaningful, right? That makes it relevant to them. So that's a key thing, and I'll share that a little more about, the following through, right? When people see that you actually implemented what they decided, it really kind of shifts the kind of dynamics. Number two, it strengthens communities, right? So it brings people together, right? Often missing a civic engagement in the neighborhood, especially in neighborhoods that may be suffering from kind of chronic health disparities and health inequities. Some of the symptoms of that is kind of, not a sense of a neighborhood. Neighbors are more isolated. Neighbors don't talk to each other. Don't build community together. And so this process is really encourages folks in their neighborhood to come together to talk about what are the issues that are impacting you in our neighborhood. What do you think is important in our neighborhood, right? And that increases opportunities to create social connections. From a public health perspective, one of the things that we're learning, I'm sure you all probably know this, is that relationships, social connections, is a foundational aspect of our health. And supporting those can have a real deep impact on a whole host of different health outcomes. And number three, it strengthens communities because it increases ownership and buy-in from the community, like I just described. When communities actually see results from their engagement, it builds buy-in and it builds ownership of that. And number three, addresses equity and improves health outcomes. Again, it centers those that are most affected and develops their leadership, right? And so it really assumes that those that are experiencing health disparities have leadership, right? They have solutions. It assumes that. But the problem is, in part, not that there's no leadership or there's no solutions, but that there's a lack of political, social, and economic power to actually take scale some of those solutions, right? So this centers those communities and assumes they have the answers. Our role is to create a process and to invest resources so that those leaders and those solutions are actually raised up. And again, it supports communities to have their own needs and challenges, which I think is critical for sustainability and for the long-term kind of health of any community. Community neighborhoods need to have a sense of ownership, need to have social, economic, and political power to influence, decisions that ultimately impact their neighborhoods, right? And so our role as public health, right, is not to create a situation where we're going to be there 10, 20, 15, 30 years. Our role should be to kind of work ourselves out of jobs, so to speak, right? And so there's a kind of three kind of key aspects that were relevant to us as a health department, and that really for us, we believe is going to help us move forward our health equity, priorities. So critical principles. So before you even get started, right, what are some principles of participatory budgeting? And just so you know, I have some notes here. So if you see me kind of look down, that's kind of what I'm doing. And I don't mean to break eye contact here, but these are critical principles. Number one, diversity of participants. Since different residents have various needs and ideas, the process should work to engage all of these diverse perspectives while still giving priority to those that typically get excluded or dismissed. And diversity includes racial background, immigrant status, formerly incarceration, stakeholder other than being resident, like parent of a child, children, elderly. We had one of our votings, and I'll share this a little later. We had a voting. Our oldest voter was 101, and our youngest was 3. Right. So really engaging, those that normally don't get involved, like children. Children don't have voting rights, but yet decisions that get made impact them. Right. So that's a key principle: diversity. Number 2, direct involvement. All residents should have the opportunity to be directly involved in making budgeting decisions, which again typically are not made by community residents. They're made by elected officials, staff, institutions, based at best with relevant data and pretty good kind of community engagement, like feedback, but ultimately those decisions are made without community involvement, right? And again, at best, people will go back and say, "Hey, what do you think about this decision?" But again, the decision is already being made. Another one is empowerment. We want to ensure that those who have a stake in the decision get a say in that decision, right? So the process should empower those that normally don't get involved in these processes. Accessibility. All stakeholders should be able to easily access every phase. Accessibility includes location and timing of meetings, removing language barriers, and alternatives for displaying information online. So really looking at accessibility in a broad sense. Try to imagine all the kinds of people and their experiences and their needs, and really building a process that has multiple avenues for all those needs to be met. Transparency. Information about the process and results should be readily available and clear to all stakeholders. And this is critical throughout the whole process, but especially also at the implementation phase. So after the voting happens, sometimes folks forget that it's really important to report back how the implementation of that project is actually happening, right? So really developing a communication infrastructure in the beginning is going to be critical, and I'll talk about this in just a sec. And the last one is shared responsibility. The process should build on common purpose and commitments between all stakeholders. And so again, shared responsibility means sharing leadership, sharing power, and sharing a commitment. That this is really kind of a collective process, right? It's really a joint effort between government or whatever agency is implementing PB, and the people that are trying to serve.
Mhm. Victor, could you maybe speak a little bit more about alternatives to displaying information online? Just
Yeah,
other
so
examples.
yeah, so and I'll share some more examples of what this means
Okay.
later, but it just means that nowadays online and web-based strategies are critical, and they're actually a big part of the PB process. But we have to remember that it's not that we can't put all our marbles there. There's a lot of people who just don't engage with the website with web-based tools and would be otherwise not involved in the process. So this may include, for example, connecting with local organizations. So for example, like during the voting, just for an example, that you work with trusted local grassroots organizations to have voting booths at their organization, so that they can work with the people they work with to make sure that they have a physical place and an actual person they can go talk to if they need to help them with their voting. This could be, doing presentations, having info sessions specifically so that people can come and ask questions and kind of learn how they can participate in different aspects of it. For the idea collection phase, having really leveraging your partners with art to expand the way you share messaging to not just be limited to text, but to include images, pictures, video, right? Just kind of multiple ways to get information into people's minds, right? And oftentimes, again, it really rely on the written word to get that information out there. So just really, and again, and I'll share more about this, but we have one of the key processes, parts of this is putting together an advisory committee, a steering committee that kind of represents that community you're trying to work with, and they actually guide you on what they believe is going to engage people. So for example, say we're doing a participatory budgeting in school, that advisory group would be led by youth, and then they will tell you, look, this is the best ways you can engage us. This is how you do it, So we hear from them, this is the ways that work to engage our community.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
And necessary conditions. This is more the kind of institutional context that is kind of necessary for PB to fully be implemented. And it kind of speaks to some of the things that folks talked about earlier, like, incorporating funding for childcare and food and all that, how much time it takes, right? All these kinds of things, right? So here's, this is kind of speaks to that. So institutional support and capacity. So people or institutions who control the budget need to agree to let the public decide how all or part of the budget will be spent, right? So there's a key moment where people or the person or the individuals in power of the money need to say, yes, we're going to share this power. We're going to let and delegate decision-making around this budget to residents, right? So there has to be that kind of institutional leadership commitment to share power. There should be enough funding to support resources and staffing in each phase of the process, right? And so you should really, institutions that's doing it need to understand that the process is going to requires resources and staffing. And I think one key, point that I'll add to that, because that's often a barrier, is, one of the things that we've done here is to really highlight how the process itself, right? The process itself, not even the actual outcome of whatever project they decide, the actual process itself is what's promoting health. Therefore, we need to invest in the process itself so that we can get the kind of outcomes that we're looking for in terms of health. So that's a key part of it: institutional support and capacity, making sure you invest the necessary resources. Number two, community partnerships engagement. So, really having a partnership with community organizations to facilitate outreach and push the process forward is really important. Institutions like government and public health need to understand what our limitations are in engaging people. And so we need to kind of establish relationships with, local organizations who have a deeper and closer relationship with, those folks you're trying to reach, and bringing them on is really important. Having those relationships really important. And again, another aspect of this is that, the PB process requires commitment, time, and energy from residents. So people have to take ownership as well. Residents have to make a commitment and say, yes, I will come to these meetings. Yes, I will spend energy on this, right? Which is easier to do when you say you have money, right? You will decide on money, right? And it's real power and real money. There has to be a commitment to equity. Areas with the greatest needs should have higher priority for funding. So if you're going to start doing a PB project, do it in the place that has the greatest needs. There should be intentional focus on strengthening community leadership over the long run, right? So this is critical, again, for building community capacity within areas and neighborhoods that are experiencing health inequities and disparities to sustain their ability to protect and create the neighborhood that they want. And so long-term leadership development is a big piece of that. Funding should be intentional and allocated to the process to address barriers to participation. I just spoke about that. So often, in equity work, there's a saying that those that are most impacted should lead the work, which is great, and they should. But a key aspect of that is recognizing that because they're experiencing inequities and disparities, there's particular barriers that need to be removed in order for them to participate. This includes transportation, childcare, language, right? Just to name a couple. So you got to make sure that if you're committed to this, that you invest in making sure that those barriers are removed in order for those communities to actually be able to participate. And lastly, commitment to community-driven process and community leadership, right? Community representatives set the rules at the start of the process in coordination with institutions of representatives. The rules should make clear that the process will be community-driven, and institutions need to accept the final outcomes decided by the community, and that's critical, right? So so I share these necessary conditions, right? So that people are thinking about doing this, it's really important to have some of these in place, because the last thing you want to do is go out to community and say, you get to decide, I'm going to implement what you say, and then you can't, right? You can't because, your top leader maybe doesn't think that we should, or there's some legal thing that you didn't account for that now you can't do that, right? So you really have to make sure that you do your homework so that whatever project is voted on, you could actually do. And I'll share with you what that process is to make sure that you have those things in place. So these are kind of the necessary conditions. I'm actually going to take a pause there to see if there's any questions around these two aspects, right? Around the principles and around necessary conditions. Great.
This is Chris. I had a question, if that's okay. I'm curious about messaging, and you talk about, there might be certain gatekeepers within health departments that make it difficult to kind of make the case for this kind of an approach. It could be the case that you're working with community members who, don't have the resources, but maybe they want to approach, their local, school departments, or they want to, talk to other kinds of departments that are collecting public funding or influence attacks and say, we should really encourage PB as a practice in this work. What are some messages or some pitches or value propositions that you found to be successful in overcoming barriers like that for folks who really believe in it and want to pursue it, but don't necessarily control all the resources to allocate money to it?
Yeah, great question. I have two that I could share. Here at the health department, the first time that we shared, so I actually, when I started working here, I brought up participatory budgeting at a management team with kind of the leadership, and it was shut down right away. People were like, well, we can't let people decide how to spend money. That's our job, right? And so there was definitely hesitancy because people didn't really understand the process, mm-hmm. right? And so I think that there's when you say, oh, people get to decide the money, people make a lot of assumptions about what that means. So, but there's two things that I think really helped us make our case. Number one, it helps us achieve our health goals. It helps us achieve our health goals. Um, um, we are out trying to solve a whole bunch of different kinds of problems, and we're trying to address these problems from a distance, and which is often the reason why our interventions either are off target or don't speak to some of the nuances to people's experiences, because we're not experiencing the problem ourselves. Those that are closest to the problem, this is a key message that we use over and over and over. Those that are closest to the problem are the best positioned to address those problems.
Mm-hmm.
Best positioned to come up with solutions to the problems. Why? Because they experience that problem every day. If you're trying to, improve a neighborhood walkability, who do you think is the best people to talk to about that? Those that walk there, right? So this process would allow your interventions to be more, how do I say it, more effective and more, I hate to use this word, but I can't think of another one right now, more targeted, right?
Mm-hmm.
But more, it really speaks to the actual problem that people are experiencing. And so I think that when we started talking about it that way, it kind of shifted, right? It kind of shifted like, this is actually can allow us to work with community members at a deeper level, and it's going to give us a better understanding as to what the problems actually are, right? So I want to give you a quick little example of kind of how that shows up. And one of the PB projects on our first ever pilot that we did it with the parks. And they had $150,000 to redo a tennis court in a neighborhood that is historically experienced, poverty and kind of the different, kind of health inequities that, we know about. And they kind of reached out to us because they had heard we're trying to do this. And one of the first questions we asked is like, how many people do you think in this neighborhood like to play tennis? They had no idea. They had no idea who actually played tennis in that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
They were just going to redo it, right? They were just going to redo it. And the neighborhood is a large percentage of immigrant, people of color community, right? That just generally speaking are not too much into tennis. And so we're like, well, how about we ask what people want, So we went through this process. Long story short, the tennis court was one of the options people could vote for. It was not the top one at all. It was like the 7th. It came down to the 7th. But the story I wanted to share was this. And one of the days that we're out in the voting, there was a young man who were at the park, the actual park that was going to get the money. We were there doing the voting, right? So people that actually use the park, right? They actually go play basketball there. They actually go have barbecues there. They actually go walking in the morning. Those are the people we want to get engaged because they use the park. So we were there, and there was a young man that was playing basketball, and he was coming up to vote, and he was like just kind of tripping. He was like, so just to be clear, what we decide collectively, you're going to do. We're like, yes, that's, and he was just kind of tripping on that. He's like, you know what? Can I give you some feedback about something? We're like, yeah. He's like, see this basketball court over there? And we looked over there, and there was kind of the parks rep there kind of with me, and there was a bunch of people there, but me and this park manager, we were kind of talking to this young man. And he's like, yeah, we're like, yeah, we can see that. And he's like, see how that fence right behind the hoop is really low? And right behind that fence, there's a road. We often, when we shoot the basketball, it bounces off the rim and it goes over the fence and it goes into the street. A bunch of us have almost gotten hit by a car, because of that. And the parks manager was like, oh, we can fix that super easy. We don't even have to wait to this process. We could just go and fix it because that's part of the things that we should do anyway. But there was no way, right, really, that this kind of parks representative could really know that was an issue unless she had been playing basketball there and she had shot it or witnessed people shooting it and going over this fence, and that was an issue, right? So again, we're limited to what we can know about how people experience their neighborhoods because we don't live there. Participatory budgeting gives us access to the people who experience the problems we're trying to solve, giving us, right, a more accurate, that was the word I was looking for, a more accurate information about what the problems are that then result in more accurate solutions and interventions. So that was a key message. And I think that when we started to kind of talk to people in those terms, I think that things really started to shift. And then the other one was around community engagement. That's what, you know, when we started this PowerPoint, we talked about that. Everyone's always struggling with community engagement. We are, you know, it's hard. It takes time, energy, it takes money that we don't have. And so we're always looking, how can we engage people in a deeper way, in a more meaningful way? And people, and that's a key message for folks, because most institutions are always struggling with that. And this process really builds capacity to do it more effectively and to really build stronger relationships with the people that you're serving, right? So those are kind of two messages that really helped us here at our health department. Kind of going to move on to the next piece, and I have a lot of information here. I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to kind of move a little quicker because I want to make sure that we get through all of this. Here are some of the key players and their roles. I'm not going to go deep into what each of the roles are, but I wanted to at least highlight, all the different players that are involved in a process. Community members, obviously, right? A steering committee. I put advisory committee as a parenthesis because that's actually we use advisory committee. I can't remember why we decided that. Agency staff. So this is the staff from the agency that's implementing the PB project, right? Agencies like local government and funders. These are other potential agencies that need to be involved. For example, if the project involves some sort of, implementing of a capital project, for example, you may need to involve, public health regulations or city regulations or rules, right? There's a lot of things that you have to consider. And so bringing, other agencies as part of that. Community-based organizations and nonprofits, I've already shared what their role is, but they're a liaison and a bridge between yourself and the communities you're trying to work with. Evaluators help evaluate the process so that it improves. Facilitators are key. I would say one of the most important parts of all this is people who have advanced facilitation skills is critical because they facilitate a whole bunch of different things. You need outreach canvas and archive workers, the people who are out there blowing the horn, come and vote, hey, come give us your ideas, right? People that are out there. And budget delegates, and I'll share more about what those are, but those are community leaders that help develop the actual proposals. So here, those are some of the key players and the key roles. There's 5 steps to participatory budgeting. There's designing the process, there's the idea collection, there's the proposal development, there's a community vote, and there's project implementation. And actually there's 6, to be truth. The 6th one's evaluation and monitoring. So once you implement the project, it's not just, okay, cool, we're done. It's, you have to monitor to make sure the project is implemented. And you have to let people in that neighborhood that voted, keep them informed about how the actual construction or implementation of the project, how it's going. Those are the steps of the process. So I'm going to walk through each step. So the design the process, and this is a critical part. Okay, this is critical because this is where you set the parameters. This is when you decide how much money do we have. This is when we say where are we going to focus. This is where you say this is how long it's going to take, right? This is where you need to understand what your limitations are as an institution. You need to look at your policies, at your legal, what things cannot be funded. And you need to know that up front so that if those ideas come up front, to come forward, you say we can't do it, right? That's actually an important piece of working with community members and building up their knowledge base about how institutions work and what limitations are in place. So they themselves grapple with some decisions that sometimes we grapple with, right? Like we want to do some things, but sometimes we can't. And so that having that information up before is really important.
Victor, Lena had a question, and I just, because it's related to this, is, when there's restrictions on funds, like if it's federal regulations or some kind of state, like she's thinking about Medicaid. And so I think just, what you're speaking to, just in terms of letting people know up front, seems like that's a way to address. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. She was a question.
Yeah, so this is the time where you look at that, can Medicaid funding be used? That'd be amazing, right? What are the limitations? This is when you look at the legal, when you look at policies and procedures, and maybe you even kind of, if you look at some of those and realize these are actually policy and procedures that are not mandated by anyone but us, and we need to change them, right? So this process also kind of encourages the institution to look within themselves to say, what can we do? What can we change to make sure that we're positioned to actually have meaningful engagement of the residents that we're working with? So, and also, I think that what's important to also recognize is that people fundamentally doesn't require like a new funding per se, right? It's really focused on ultimately funding or using existing budgets to do this work, if that makes sense. So set the project parameters, talk to your legal team, talk to your HR people, or to your contracts procurement processes. Learn about what your limitations are so that you know all that information going forward. The second important part of the first phase, and also I wanted to share, there's a lot other details that I'm not going into because of the time limitation. So I'm only kind of highlighting the most important stuff. Just wanted to let you know also too. So if there's things on here that you think, oh, I want more information on, let me know. But the other piece to this is convening your steering committee or advisory committee. And these are folks that live in the area that you're trying to work with. These are residents, right? These are community members. These are local leaders most of the time, right? And what they do is that they guide the process and set the rules, right? So they say, okay, we're going to do this PB in my neighborhood. Okay, these are the times. It's the best day to do it. These are the best places. You have to go to this store, right? You have to go to this carniceria down the street because that's where all the Latinos go, or you have to go over here because that's where all the young people go, right? They know all this information because that's where they live. So they kind of help you guide the process and kind of tell you this is how you should engage us, basically. And they kind of set the rules, right? And this is the other key piece. You establish a communication infrastructure. It's really important because a key part of this is keeping people informed about what's happening throughout the process, especially when it comes to the voting. It's really important that you have these systems already set up, and also too when you're sharing results, and also too when you're implementing, having these communication channels set up beforehand is really important. They also will collect and prioritize ideas, and then they're also going to develop proposals. And as you can, like you see, I say involve your finance office early because we had to learn that the hard way because we went down the process and then we found out there were certain things we couldn't fund. Also too, because we're government, we can't just choose an organization to fund. We have to go through a bidding process. So there was just a lot of troubleshooting that we had to do to make sure that we follow our procurement and contract processes to implement these projects. So first step, design the process in collab. And this is again, this designing of the process is a close collaboration between community members, that advisory team, and then your institutional agency kind of collaborators, right? So your agency institutions, they come to this meeting already with what the boundaries and parameters are because of whatever legal or policy limitations that funding may have, right? So then the steering committee bases their rules and their process based on some of those kind of parameters. So that's phase one. Phase two is you start collecting ideas, right? And I guess one other thing I wanted to mention, that is other because I just looked at my notes, and this is an important piece of this, is in the first process of designing the process, identifying a point person for whatever each agency is involved is really important. And really making sure that there's clear roles and responsibilities so that everyone knows who's what, who to communicate, to do what. That's just going to save you a whole lot of logistical kind of inefficiencies down the line. So that's important, really establish roles and responsibilities with all the key players.
Victor, a question just in terms of size of the committee. Is there any factors there that you matter?
So key factor, if you look, if we remember, one of the key principles is diversity. So that may vary, right? So depending on the scope. So if, for example, if you're doing participatory budgeting with the whole city, right, your advisor group might be a little larger than if you're doing like a small 10,000 PB project for like a housing complex. You know? So really what should drive the size is really, you know, diversity in perspectives. That being said, as I'm sure you all know, the larger you get, the more logistical and process challenges will arise, right? Just coordinating meetings, coordinating schedules, you know, all those kinds of logistical aspects will be more difficult to do with more people, right? So I think that, you know, generally speaking, anywhere from 7 to 15 max, you know, but really 7 to 12, you know, would be like a good number. But again, really looking at making sure that you have diverse perspectives from that community.
Great,
so,
thank you.
Yeah, next piece is, again, the collection. And this is really where you're gonna go out to say, hey, how should you think, what's something that we can do to improve our neighborhood, you know? And there's different ways that you can frame that depending on your funding, right? So if your funding parameters say, this funding must be spent on reducing tobacco usage in this neighborhood, right? Then that's a funding parameter. That means that people get to decide on any project they want, but it has to be within that it has to somehow connect to reducing tobacco use. Make sense? So this is the part when you go out and you say, hey, everybody, we're trying to, strengthen our community, our school, or our housing complex. What are your ideas for that? You know? And so again, your advisory committee will know the best way to collect ideas in their community. During this process is when you need to be recruiting budget delegates and facilitators, right? From community-based organizations, from community members. And this is a key aspect because, if you're able to do it, and it's difficult, you have to kind of implement a few to actually get to a place where you are able to recruit budget delegates that are community members. Oftentimes what happens is that grassroots organization kind of leaders, right, often step up to that task. But this is an important piece because this is the part where you're building leadership, right? This is the part when, these budget delegates are going to be working with city officials or institution officials to say, hey, this is what the community wants. And then they learn, oh, there's a policy that we can't do. Okay, well, can we do this, right? So they're the ones who are negotiating almost with the institutions about what's feasible and what's not. And they're also taking all the ideas, right? Because when people share their ideas, they're not sharing proposals, they're sharing ideas. And the role of the advisory committee and the budget delegates is to take those ideas and to develop a proposal that reflects the spirit of those ideas, right? And so budget delegates are critical. There's a lot of power in that piece. And I'll talk more about the development of proposals because there's a lot of power in that particular piece of this process. So it's really important. You should have a whole host of different options, social media, online service, in-person, community forums, idea boxes at various locations. It should be everywhere. Everyone should know about it. And that's why I was saying earlier, having that communication structure set up before is really important. And then some considerations for collecting your ideas is make it easy for people to give their input. Don't make it complicated. Don't have it be a long form or something boring. Do something fun. A key thing that makes things successful is connecting with with arts and artists, so that they can help you engage people in a fun way. Where they can draw, they could paint. Just a whole host of different ways to get people to get their ideas rolling. Collaborate with other events. If things are already happening in the neighborhood, don't create your own. Go out to that neighborhood, work with community partners, say this is what we're doing, have an idea collection, table or a place at different events. so that you're also building on, you know, what's already happening in the neighborhood. Collect as many ideas as possible from as many people as possible, and provide follow-up information. And this is the key thing right here, is having I guess it's called like a customer relations software, I guess it's kind of technically called. But what it's really important for future work is that when you engage people and with their permission, that you collect information like email and phone number, and you start kind of developing a database so you can regularly engage these people around this process, right? Through email, through Facebook, right? And so it's a good way to kind of build a base of community members that are, you know, kind of attuned to what's happening with these projects. So, you know, this idea collection is really important. I'm trying to look and see, make sure I capture all the key points. Yes. Developing proposals. So after you spent so I forgot to mention the timeline. So a typical timeline, right, for you know, a project, the ideal is 12 months. We don't do those in 12 months. We've done ours in like in 3 months. And part of that is because we haven't really institutionalized it yet, and we're taking more time, but it's a 12-month process. And so again, you know, going back to why the process is important, is that it's the actual process that strengthens the social connections, builds the knowledge base, right? Builds leadership, right? So throughout the year, you're just working with people, right? You're continually engaging them. You know, one of the things that I see that is not always intentional, but that it kind of just happens, is that institutions generally only go to communities when they need something, right? Like, for example, instead of running a report, oh, we need to get feedback to make sure we have community voice, so they go and get that feedback. Or, oh, we're having a grant, you know, we got to engage people so that they're involved in this grant, right? So we go and get their feedback, right? So after a while, communities notice that. People notice that, you know, government or institutions only go to community when they need something, right? And so a key aspect of what we're trying to do here at the health department, that we still are trying to figure out what that looks like, because there's a lot of challenges like staff turnover, budget changes, right? Is to really build relationship with community based on our common goals, not on some project that just came up or some grant, right? That we just make it part of our business to be present in communities, right? With not necessarily an agenda. The agenda is just to make a connection and to build a relationship. And again, it goes back to what I was saying before, community engagement is ultimately about building relationships. If you have a friend that is always calling you and they only call you when you need something, after a while, you're going to be like, you know what I'm saying? You're not going to fully trust this person. You're going to be like, you're going to feel like this person only calls you when you need something.
Okay, well, we'll give you this menu for this week, and hopefully you'll like it and be able to actually it lasts like.
Can somebody get a question? Or
dinner, and then you can have like maybe lunch and dinner the next.
I just muted them.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. Let's see here, going back. So developing proposals. So again, the advisory committee and budget delegates determine how project proposals are written and presented. So they recruit other volunteers to help. For example, there's a lot of research about, so if somebody says, oh, we should do like I don't know, a new park, or a new, maybe that's kind of big, but like a new, I don't know, playground, you know, a new playground at this park. You need to know how much that park's going to cost, how much that's going to cost, you know, what materials, you know, are going to cost, what the labor is, right? You need to do all that research so that when you develop proposals, people are voting on the actual cost. And not only that, you know, you have to make sure it stays within your budget. So that, but other things, you know, volunteers can do is like art, communications, outreach, right? And then they group ideas together and prioritize them. And then they work with representatives from the agency to develop proposals. So that's why there's so much power in this particular piece. And that's why it's really important that you engage the right delegates, and that they're actually representatives from the community you're trying to work with. Because there's a lot of power in prioritizing and synthesizing ideas, right? And then this is the longest phase with the most collaboration from different groups. And so effective facilitation is key. So there's a lot of conversations with the advisory committee, the delegate budget delegates and with the agency representatives about what's feasible and what's not. This is when you're talking to your finance people, right? When you're talking to any relevant aspect of your agency or other agencies that may have a stake in that particular proposal or that particular idea. And then lastly, again, proposals must be financially and legally feasible. And that's why if you do your homework early, right, you'll kind of address this better if you address this early on in the process. But you need to meet with your agency legal and contract requirements. So you need to, so part of the budget developing proposals is that any proposal that goes up to vote has to be implemented, has to be able to be implemented. So a key part in the beginning of the process that I forgot to mention actually is that you decide how many proposals get to be on the ballot. And you have to make sure, this is critical, make sure that any proposal that gets put on the ballot, could be implemented if voted on. So that's why each proposal needs to be vetted with agency representatives to make sure that it's feasible.
And Victor, those are, so just to be clear, so if there's, 6 different things, it's not necessarily all of them, but that individually they could be implemented?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you need to assume, right, that any of those proposals can win.
Yeah.
So you have to, and again, what builds that trust is when you say, hey, if tell me what you want to do, and then we'll do it, and then you do it, and they see it, right? That's what creates the trust. And they're like, oh, like if, for example, that neighborhood needs new sidewalks, and then that's the top vote, and then 3 months later or 2 months later or whatever, they see sidewalks being implemented. It's a big deal in people's minds, right? It's a huge empowerment of like they actually seeing results from their engagement. Next piece is the actual voting. And this is, again, another key aspect of it. So create deep and meaningful engagement. Make it fun, use culture, use art, so bring the vote to as many community members as possible, especially traditionally underrepresented communities. So this goes back to, remember I was saying earlier about making sure you put in enough funds to facilitate barriers, right? So in order so that people have, the best possible opportunity to actually cast their vote. This is a part where you educate people about PB and how they can be involved in the vote and future cycles, right? So for a lot of community members, their engagement in this process might just be casting a vote, right? But if they cast a vote, that's an opportunity for you to engage them on a next cycle, on a different process, right? Or in other opportunities, right? So educate them about the process and how they can be involved. And then communicate proposals through different mediums. I already talked about this, use a whole host of different ways to share what the proposals actually are. Typically, these include online, right? Voting stations. I really like doing like a voting expose to kind of launch it, where it's like kind of a community event where you have, light refreshments, people come and there's like boards, people walk around and they kind of read. This is actually cool too for like the community members that were involved in developing that proposal, right? They get a chance to kind of share their process and, answer questions and, that's kind of a good way to kind of get votes, in addition to online, and voting stations. One of the things that we did with the schools, and I'll share that right now as one of the examples, we work with our local auditor's office, and they help provide actual voting ballots and voting boxes that, are the ones that we use for our regular voting. And so, that was really cool for folks to kind of practice democracy almost, right? So that's community voting. Project implementation is really important. Let me see here. Okay, make sure I captured everything. So communicate results and communicate them as quickly as you can. Again, when people see that their input had an actual impact and you can show that as quickly as possible, it's right away going to catch their attention, because that's not regularly what happens. So, bring community implementing agencies together, try to create timelines and accountability structures. So you went through this process and your neighborhood said, we need a new park, a playground, right? Okay, well, make sure that there's communications about the process that it takes to actually implement. And it's actually a good way to do more community engagement, you know? So for example, like when you break ground, that could be an event that you show. Maybe you just like you invite people out there, or you share on social media, you do a press release, or, you know, you do kind of different ways to continue to get people involved. Begin the contracting process, right? So again, implementing organization should have already been okayed. So at this point, you know, the organization that's actually going to pay for the project should already have agreed to, and they should be able to implement what is decided on. And if support is needed, this should happen ASAP, and you don't want to be there at all. Work with implementation organization to keep plugged in the process. Again, keeping people engaged in how the project is being implemented till completion is really important, so that people continue to stay engaged and again see that their voice is actually being heard. Okay, so that's really in a nutshell what the process is. And the other piece again that I didn't mention in this presentation was the evaluation piece, but that's just really and that goes into the design process. It's just, you know, how you're going to evaluate this process. So that'll be another piece of this that you want to include. But those are the basic steps. Are participatory budgeting. I know I've shared a lot of information, but hopefully you got a sense as to what the PB process is like. So I'm going to do a quick little pause here to see if people have any questions about anything I presented thus far. Next, I'll share a couple of examples of some of the things that we've done.
Yeah, this is Sue again. I'm just wondering, for folks that are in the midst of designing, think about, you know, whatever your wellness fund, just how some of what Victor is sharing resonates with you, or you know, anyway, I'm just looking for feedback. Just curious.
Hey, Sue, this is Jessica in Humboldt, and we've been talking recently about what our sort of future processes will be around grant making, which is sort of the wrong term to use, but certainly some of the things that Victor has shared gets me thinking about how we can have a sort of more meaningful process to engage community members in that, and as well as sort of identifying community-based priorities. I think the anecdote about the tennis court.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's kind of Theory U in action. It's like, that's what I was, you know, Dana texted me and said, I love the basketball story, because that's like an exact example of, you think it's one thing and then you're going deeper, right? And gaining a perspective is like, oh, which I think, you know, to your point earlier, Victor, is being effective around where you're going to target your resources really needs to be informed by people who are living in community, right? And we don't, you know, we don't know, right? So thanks, Jessica. And then Christina said, I think once we are there, we would absolutely take this approach in the work. Yeah. And I think what's really speaking to me is just how intentional, like it's very intentional along the way, like that's what I'm hearing, you know, over and over, which I think is really helpful. So Christania, do you have any, you know, Christania is actually leaving us and is going to work for a national organization that this is what they do, is participatory budgeting. And I'm very sad, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or reflections or.
No, I just really appreciate, I'll miss you too. I just really appreciate sort of the, you know, walking through the steps, because I think that oftentimes, I think Victor's alluded to this multiple times throughout the presentation, is that we see community as a very niche kind of stakeholder, and that sometimes our relationships very traditionally can be very extractive. And this, I think, sets up a space where it's recognizing that not only are we interested in their input or interested in their perspectives, but we're actually going to put something behind that. We're actually going to invest our resources that I think all of us know we work very hard to bring in. There's always, never enough money for what we need to do. I mean, those kinds of tangible resources are always really hard to come by, and we really value them in our nonprofit spaces, our health department spaces. And to be able to say, not only will we, actually put this into the community, but do it in a way that's guided by the community, I think is such a really great process to embrace. And I think it can also spur lots of other types of related, just a different mindset of how we engage with community. So it might start with PB and hopefully can really change how we engage our community members in decision making and infusing real power into their voices and their expertise. So I just think it's a really great approach. And I'm just really grateful, Victor, for you sharing all of the details that kind of make it a little bit more bite-sized, a little bit more realistic and thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Yeah. The Participatory Budgeting Project at the national level are doing amazing work. We've worked with them, and they, helped us in our thinking around this. And they have a whole host of different resources on their website. So definitely encourage folks to also look at their website. They also have a lot of messaging. People talk about messaging that I think is good, and a lot of research that oftentimes needed to make your case, especially around like civic engagement, voter turnout, all those kinds of things. So really encourage you guys to connect with them.
And I'll make those like the link available too when we post it. So thanks for mentioning that.
So that's kind of, again, in a nutshell, what the process is. I have a bunch of examples. I'm actually going to focus on one or two just so that you can we can have more time for questions at the end. But the first one that we did that we really piloted with was we after we did that initial pilot with the parks, we applied for a grant to do participatory budgeting in schools with young people. And we got the grant, and it basically allowed us to do participatory budgeting in 3 schools, at a high school, middle school, and an elementary school. And I wanted to show you the high school project that we went through. We have made a video. Well, I didn't make the video. The project kind of create a video to show the process. And just a little background. So Lincoln High School is a school here in the East Tacoma neighborhood that kind of has historically been experiencing health inequities and disparities due to kind of negative economic, social, and environmental conditions. And we focused in this neighborhood in part because of that, and in part because we already had connections with community leaders in that area. But this project involved high schoolers and also involved the auditor's office. We brought in the auditor's office, and students got to go to the auditor's office to count their ballots in the official kind of process. So I hope you enjoy it. It's about 4 minutes, I think, and hopefully it plays okay.
It's a special election day for students at Lincoln High School.
So this is Pierce County elections.
Okay, I'm gonna pause. Can people hear it?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can hear it.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
It might be showing up. Is this the video? I mean, because I'm not seeing anything. I don't know if it's showing up on another screen, and you might have to do another screen share.
I can see the whole thing.
Oh, you can? Okay. Maybe it's just me.
Okay.
No.
How about now?
Oh, there. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
We're glad to have you here. You guys have your election. You guys brought in your ballots in here. We're going to process these in a little bit. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to give you a tour of our facility.
The reason they're here today is because of a partnership between Pierce County Elections, the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department, and Tacoma Public Schools.
Kids have actually been given the opportunity to directly decide how to spend $60,000 at their school. So we are finding out the results to their vote today.
We check every single signature of every single ballot as they come back in, This machine helps us do that.
Learning how a ballot is processed is all part of these students carrying out their own election.
These are our scanners here, and you guys are actually going to help scan your ballot.
My students at Lincoln had the opportunity through a health department grant to vote on various proposals for a project to improve our health at Lincoln High School. And we have the opportunity to come open our ballots and put them through the ballot counting machines, which is, for me as a government teacher, is awesome. It's like democracy in action.
Now you guys are going to actually be opening your own ballots.
After a quick lesson on how to securely open and sort ballots, it's time for students to roll up their own sleeves. It's a new strategy in community engagement called participatory budgeting.
This process is essentially an exercise of, one of our basic rights as American citizens, and that's to vote.
Lincoln High students submitted 550 ideas on how to spend $60,000 to solve one problem. The top 7 ideas made the ballot.
Some of the options included replacing our water fountains with water bottle filling stations, to renovate our bathrooms, because our bathrooms at Lincoln for students need a little bit of a facelift. So we also had on there an option to have a activity bus.
It's definitely needed. The boys' bathroom doesn't really have a mirror in it.
Like, we're in a really low income school, so most of us have never like, we can't picture $60,000. Like, I still can't picture what $60,000 looks like and is going to do for us.
Voting is important, and this will help the kids, know that this is an important and real thing, and there's real consequences for voting because their money is going to get spent by how they vote. So there's meaning to it. Now, putting it face up in the bottom tray.
Everything was real money, real process, real time, the entire life cycle of public policy.
So why was Lincoln High School chosen?
Lincoln High School is really large. It has 1,500 plus students. It's the only school serving the east side of Tacoma, which is a really large neighborhood with multiple zip codes that cover about 20,000 plus people.
The health department says they found a connection between areas of low voter turnout and unhealthy communities.
Poverty, poor health, and low voter turnout are all very highly correlated, and it's hard to say which is causing the other.
Community leaders want to see if civic engagement changes those unhealthy trends.
I'm doing a voter registration campaign at Lincoln High School. Our goal is 300 students to get registered. And so I think coming here and learning this process is very integral to what we've been learning in APW.
But getting kids involved early and getting involved often might make them better voters in the future and get them more engaged overall in their whole community.
I would definitely take my vote more seriously now in the future.
In the end, more than 1,000 students cast a ballot, and the $60,000 winner took 32% of the vote.
And the winner is bathroom improvements.
I feel like a lot of people underestimate how much of a direct impact you can have when you're voting, and I feel like this kind of like reaffirms the fact that like you're directly like doing something that can influence something so huge.
I have a feeling that the youth that participated in this exercise, I think, are going to be regular and discerning voters, and we need them in our community.
Megan Hutton, Pierce County News.
Oops.
It's a
Come back to this.
You got lots of great chat comments.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love this. That was Allison. Whoa. So cool. That's Christina. And can the link to this news story be shared? Looks like it's on YouTube. So yeah.
It's on this website or the slide deck too.
Oh, great. Okay. So when we.
Yep. And and we've done a bunch of projects with the Tacoma Public Schools since then. And where we're at now, I had a meeting with the facilities director, and he's like, "We're totally committed to this, and here's where the change happens. This is the next step in all this, right? So we got this grant, right?" And he was like, "Where's the next grant, Victor? Where how can we get that?" Right? And what I said was, "Well, okay, let's start with the facilities budget, right? So next step is for the school district to look at their own budgets, right? So instead of looking for other grants, I mean, we can still look for grants, right? It's important. PB ultimately is transforming how institutions delegate funds, how they spend funds, right? So it's about how do you shape your budgeting process to make sure that it's community driven as much as possible, right? So you don't need new money for that. You just need to have a budget, which most institutions already have. So the next step is looking at facilities budget to look at what funds within the school, Tacoma Public Schools, can actually be used for PB. One of the teachers, one of the principals involved was super excited. We're in one of the meetings and she's like, oh yeah, I get $1,000 just like for whatever the school needs at my discretion. I'll just use that for PB. I was like, yeah, that's great. So, so right now we're working with the school to build up their capacity to lead those projects. So that's one of the projects that we did. I'm kind of gonna go quickly with some of the other ones, but we did, this is a neighborhood one that we did, Springbrook Connections. So there's a neighborhood in our county that's super isolated next to the base, that is just experiencing a lot of challenges. And so we did a $10,000 small project there for PB. And funded 3 proposals, included free community meals, community garden improvements, and a Springbrook day camp. Went through that same process that I talked about. We also did one in Cape Peninsula, which is a rural part of our county, and kind of went through the same process there. And this was with the community. This wasn't at a school. This was with the community. Then we had another PB project in East Side, right? So this is where the same neighborhood was at. The school was at, but this is a neighborhood one. This is a neighborhood PB, and went through the same process there. And so I kind of rushed through those because I wanted to see if there was any discussion. We have about 13 minutes, and I wanted to make sure that folks had some, discussion. I have some questions there. We don't have to follow those, but if folks have questions or feedback or just want to offer any thoughts, I'm just going to open it up.
Do you have I'm just seeing the YouTube. Did you have questions that you said are on slides?
I'm sorry. I think
No, it's okay. I just didn't know if it was me.
Let me see here. Share. I think I'm not sure. There we go.
Great.
Yep. So what questions do you might have about the process? What stood out for you, and what challenges do you see implementing PB in your work? Again, we don't have to, stick to these, but if folks have other questions they want to explore, this is the time to do that. No questions, huh? Was that clear?
Here, let's see. Allison, for the school vote, did you narrow down the options first?
Yes. So, part of the PB process is you collect ideas, right? And then you have those budget delegates that narrow down those ideas and develop proposals based on those ideas. And a proposal includes how much it's going to cost, is it feasible, right? Like those kinds of things. So yes, we I think if I heard correctly, there was like 1,000 ideas submitted, or it was something like that. There was quite a bit of ideas submitted for the school PB, and then it got narrowed down into 7 projects, and then people voted on those.
Diego, oh wait, let's see. Did you explain to the kids why the chosen items were narrowed down? That's another follow-up question from Allison, wanting to know did you explain to the kids why the chosen? Yeah, go ahead, Allison.
You give them your why. Like, this is why we're not putting in a new park, or why that's not an option. But I'm just asking if kind of you let them know the reason for narrowing it down to 7 options.
Yeah, and so one of the key aspects of this is having that the advisory group and those delegates, and that conversation happens there, right? And having those existing communication channels ready to go is really important as well, so that you can share updates about decisions that have been made. So have so the answer to your question, the short answer is yes, right? But that happens in a collaborative way. So, you know, as you develop a proposal and there's a proposal, then you take that proposal and you work with, for example, in the school setting, you got to work with facilities. Hey, facilities, you know, this is one of the projects that, you know, oh, sorry, this thing keeps, that we want to do. Is this possible for us to do? And if they said yes, great. And if not, then we would share it to the budget delegates, you know, to understand that, and then they would communicate that to the student body. But specifically, the budget delegates are the most involved in that particular piece as to what's feasible and what's not. We also, just for going back to the equity thing, when we went to the school, we made sure, and Sue, you hit it right on when we said about being intentional. So when we went there, we intentionally said to the school principal and to the school administration, we want to work with the students that normally don't engage, right? So we don't want your, you know, kind of your existing top leaders that already are doing awesome, right? And that's great that they're doing awesome, and that's great, you support that. But this process, again, intentionally focused on promoting equity, focuses on those that normally don't get engaged. And so we work with they have like a special, like a class that works with students who are struggling for various different reasons. And so that class basically became that advisory group. These are the students who, you know, are, again, typically not involved in school activities, or not, you know, certainly not involved in student government. You know, now we're kind of directing this process.
I'm wondering, Diego, so Diego is in Imperial County, so the southern part of the state, you know, close to right on the border there. And they actually have a wellness fund and have developed some criteria for how funds, I'm wondering, I'm gonna put you on the spot, Diego, and you know, see if you have any reactions or thoughts or reflections, anything just about what you've heard today. He's got himself on mute. Oh, he can't unmute. He's going to answer. Yeah, so, you know, he's going to do a response in there so he can follow up. Yeah, I'm curious, you know, while he's doing that, you know, others, just in terms of what stood out for you, this question here, you know, what you like about it. I think that the example that you provided, I know you provided a number, those are really helpful to kind of make it more concrete, just about how, like, you know, you actually have done this. So any folks, Gina, I'm going to pick on people. Is Gina still on? Or Lisa from Seattle, any thoughts on this?
Hi, this is Lisa from Healthier here in Seattle. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, so I've been sitting here thinking about this would be great to use we're working on standing up a community information exchange, and we're going to need to prioritize among many different populations that we can focus on, and different types of initiatives. So in my head, I was thinking, I might we could apply this process to things other than specifically taking money and investing it. I guess if anyone has comments on that, that would be great.
Yeah, go ahead, Victor. I don't know if you have any thoughts. I mean, it sounds like, Lisa, what you're thinking is taking kind of the elements or the aspects of this process and applying it to other work that maybe doesn't have money. Is that what you're thinking, or?
Sorry, I muted and unmuted. So I've been thinking it's a big investment of time and effort for this project, and so and it's a broad set of options. For example, we start with women and children 0 to 5 or veterans or complex patients, and that will impact which organizations are involved and which populations are served first. So just thinking about helping with prioritization.
Yeah, I think, and we use a similar process for our planning and developing priorities. Our health equity initiative includes one kind of strategy called communities of focus, which is kind of what the King County's communities of interest kind of is, which is really looking at in our county, where are the areas most impacted by health inequities, and let's focus there. And one of the first things that we did is to develop priorities based community-driven priorities. And so we use different kind of methods to do that. And these include, so PB is one of the tools that we're using, but we're also using community-based participatory research to do like the data collection, for example, when we're doing prioritization or strategy development. We used community assemblies, and it's a particular one that's called a People's Movement Assembly. It's a community assembly, it's an organizing tool, and it's a collective process that allows community members to do three things. One, identify the most pressing issues in their community. Number two, develop the vision they want. And number three, develop actions for themselves. And so, you know, we also use that. And those three kind of primary strategies have helped us identify priorities in those neighborhoods. And now we use those priorities to guide our own investments, but also to help promote and encourage others to invest in these neighborhoods, number one, and number two, in these priorities, right? And our next step is we're going to develop a web-based story mapping kind of thing of each of these neighborhoods that speaks to the inequities. But you know, one of the things that my communications manager asked me about, you know, about communication on health equity. How do we get people to talk about health equity? You know, how do we promote this message? And I started thinking about my own life and about my own experiences, my family's also experiences, and I started thinking that the health equity, when we say that, right, when we say, for example, this neighborhood's experiencing inequities, what we're saying is that people are suffering for unfair and unjust reasons. That's what we're saying. And sometimes when health equity doesn't capture that, right, or health inequities doesn't capture that. So, and though, here's the important piece, that despite that suffering, right, there's hope, there's vision, there's leaders. Those neighborhoods find ways to create beautiful art, find ways to thrive, find ways to laugh, find ways to build deep connections, right? They find ways to lead. And so part of what I think PB is, it really has to be part of a broader commitment to really address the root causes of inequities, and really understanding that the communities impacted have solutions. The problem is that they don't have power and resources to address those things. Part of the reason why you give up power to those decisions, right, is to address that, right? You're shifting that institutional dynamic that exists within institutions and community members, and thereby diminishing these kind of dynamics that actually perpetrate these inequities. So it's a long way of saying is that yes, there's elements of this that could definitely be applied. I would caution though to call a process PB if it doesn't ultimately lead to people deciding how to spend money, because that's what the process is, and that's what makes it powerful. And Seattle actually is doing that through their neighborhoods program. They're doing neighborhood-based participatory budgeting, and I know they've implemented a few projects already, and so they're definitely doing that work also.
Thank you.
So just a couple, I know we just got about 1 minute. So let's see, Julie said, I've been thinking about how to engage our youth voice. I was trying to develop a youth leadership summit to hear their concerns and ideas for improved community health, but this is such a great concrete way of engaging. I will be examining this to see if I can try it out. And then Diego, who I put on the spot, he's in Imperial County. I think that PBB is definitely the ideal in our community for the use of the Wellness Fund. Our meetings are open to the public, the Brown Act, but they are not always conducive to community input since there is a pretty strict process. Currently, we encourage our Community Health Improvement Partnership and their steering council to provide input in the budgeting process to support local health efforts. For example, the LHA Commission will be putting out funding for local nonprofit organizations to build their capacity to engage in the collective efforts with a priority to health conditions identified by the community to be of priority through the Community Health Improvement Plan. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that folks, you know, got some ideas flowing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, for us, it wasn't an overnight thing. And I think I'll just kind of close by saying, you know, kind of what I was saying earlier, which is that this is kind of a broader commitment to address inequities in our county. And when we look at, you know, what are some of the root causes of that, when you peel back the onion enough, it's really about power, about who has it and who doesn't. And there's a lot of power that lies in decision making. You know, who makes decisions is really important to look at. Who's making decisions? And particularly within decisions that are made, decisions around budgets are really important in addressing inequities, because that's where a lot of the power lies, right? Mm-hmm. And so by decentralizing you know, power in the budget making process and intentionally connecting with people that are most impacted, right, you begin to kind of peel back and undo some of these kind of institutional processes that you know, perpetuate inequities in communities. And ultimately, you know, what this is really about is, you know, creating transparent, you know, equitable and meaningful government processes, so that the people they serve, you know, are really, you know, engaged in meaningful ways, and whatever priorities are based or do reflect the lived experience of those people. And so, you know, we're still learning. We're not at a place where we're, you know, we finally, you know, figured it out. But by now, the projects we've implemented, community members are really responding in a positive way. We're getting a lot of positive feedback, and people are really seeing it as a move of like, okay, you know, you are serious when you talk about health equity, right? Like, you're really putting money where your mouth is. And so it's just kind of allowed us to kind of deepen our relationships with community members.
Well, and you're building trust, right? Because you're doing what you're saying.
Exactly.
You know, doing, right. So great. This was amazing. So thank you so much for your time. And thanks to all of you that joined. And then, so Victor, yeah, if you could send the slides and a couple other resources that you mentioned, that would be great.
I can definitely do that. Well, thanks everybody, and I hope
thank you.
And we'll be in touch soon.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Victor.
Thank you.
Bye.